Welcome, everybody. It looks like we are live according to systems, which is great. So stick around. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to tell you all about various different aspects of photography and why you might want to consider coming to join our academy. So stick around and I'll be back shortly. Welcome, everybody. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about Beyond the Lens Academy in a minute. And also some tips about photography and some various little insights and stuff. So if you don't know who I am, I've just managed to get the left and right thing worked out with this one. It's Carl Thomas. So this is being streamed to Carl Thomas Photography and Beyond the Lens Academy Facebook pages, actually on our YouTube channel as well. So Carl Thomas Photography is a business I set up, 6 years ago now, which is a professional business and everything else, which is not what we're here to talk about today, actually. What we're here to talk about is Beyond the Lens Academy. And the reason I set it up, and I'll come on and explain a little bit about what it is, and then we'll talk about some aspects of photography that sometimes confuse people. But during my various different iterations of photography over the years, my journey, I suppose you could say, I found that there was lots of content available, and there still is, but it's not in one place. It's lots of different, it's very fragmented. It's a bit all over the place. You've got to, read books, watch YouTube channels, and all these different things to find out what on earth's going on. So in 2020, I set up Beyond the Lens Academy, which is an online training support platform, which now, after 2 years, as you can imagine, has absolutely tons of content in it. A smorgasbord of content, all to do with photography at every single level, whether you've just got your first camera or you're even a well-advanced amateur. We've got a separate thing called the Full Frame Club, which you might have seen me talking about earlier on the week, which is for people who are actually going into business. Now, the kind of things we talk about. So before we get into sort of too much detail, let me put some banners up here. So kind of what's in it, and I'll just briefly touch on this, and then we'll come back to it. So there is a private Facebook group, very popular. Lots of stuff goes on there. Now, this bit here, online learning modules. There are, when you log on, if you subscribe, I've got some amazing offers for you to encourage you to. There's lots of stuff to watch, and that's pre-recorded. Webinars a bit like this will be with, me talking about a subject, might be, say, depth of field, and people asking questions which come up on the screen and so on. But we do those every week. So this week we've done 3 webinars. So every week is 2, 3, 4 webinars, sometimes even more than that are done live, and the recorded version of that is stuck in the library for you. So it's a constantly evolving platform. There is a mobile app. Obviously, I talked about these webinars, do them every week. New gear reviews, something that we do quite regularly, talk about all the new equipment that's coming out and so on. Group image critiques. So the current one actually is spring. What people do is upload some images, and then I come along and critique them and do that live. People love that. I do live edits. So the one I did today wasn't an edit particularly. It was all about Lightroom and its component parts. So that is just a flavour of what's involved. But I'm sure you're more interested in photography, really. So let me just tell you about a few bits and pieces. So the kind of things that we cover. So let's think about. Let me do a couple of things here. Let's talk about depth of field, for example. Well, I'm going to talk about a few things here. Anybody got any questions? Pop them in the comments. Actually, let me put the website up there as well. Let's forget to do this. lensacademy.com on thelensacademy.com. That's the website. There are no, so don't subscribe just yet. You can click and subscribe. You scroll down a bit and there's like the Academy membership thing. But I've got some offers for you, which are even better than the offers that are on there. So hang around. I'll be posting those links up in a bit. Oh. Beyond the Lens Academy.com. For some reason it said there was an error. Wait a minute, we can try again. Bizarre. So yes, things that we talk about. So depth of field. Let me go back to pictures. Let me just try that again. I'm not sure it's coming up on the feed. BeyondTheLensAcademy.com. Yeah. Working now. Don't know what happened there. Bit of a glip. So let's think about depth of field. Now, depth of field is the amount of image that's acceptably sharp. The amount that's in focus, if you like. So in this image here, we've got a very shallow depth of field. So the orchid and the bee is in focus. The background and a fairly large portion of the foreground is not in focus. Same here with this rather lovely picture of a gannet. Did on one of our workshops. Another one here, look. Dog in focus, background and foreground slightly softer. And another one here. Another one here. So people, though, often think that depth of field, that lovely shallow depth of field, can only be achieved by having expensive. This is not. This is a coffee cup actually, but those L lenses with that red thing. If you're a Canon shooter, and so that kind of is partly true, because the shallower the aperture, the lower the number, the less of the image that will be in focus. Depth of field. Now, let's talk about aperture for a minute, because that confuses people sometimes, and it doesn't help because the photography world is full of lots of different things that are not necessarily. Let me put this. I'll click on that one there. I'll be in the corner now. Not necessarily logical. So this is aperture. Aperture is the hole in the lens that gets bigger or smaller via these little blades to allow more or less light in. And as you can see from this is just a selection of the numbers that you might find on your lens. 1.4, 2, 2.8, f4. As the number increases, the hole is getting smaller all the way up to f16 on this one. And of course, you can go up to f22, 32. So that's what aperture is. Now, at a wide aperture, wide open is another term that people use, which will be a low number, f2.8, f1.2. You have a shallow depth of field. So let me demonstrate to you, or show you something if I find it, what that might look like. So here we have 4 pictures of the same subject at the same distance, with different shutter speeds to allow the light to be correct on each one, because we've changed the aperture. So in the top left, you can see that we've got an aperture of 3.5. The top right, we've got an aperture of 5.6. Bottom left, f10. Bottom right, f22. And what you can see from these images, that with everything else staying the same in terms of the subject distance and so on, that more of the image becomes in focus. So in the top left-hand one, we've got a nice shallow depth of field with the leaves in focus and the background nice and blurry. In the bottom right, we've got a less shallow depth of field with quite a lot of the image in the background, still not technically sharp, but coming into focus. And so that's why people often think, when they see that sort of tutorial and that sort of explanation, think, oh, okay, yeah, so I need to get a lens that's got 2.8 or 1.2, or we shoot at the wider end. Now, not technically true. A big part of what we do in the academy is help people enjoy photography without spending a fortune on gear. So let me show you something else that varies depth of field that's not aperture related. So here's an aperture. I think this is shot at 5.6. So not particularly shallow depth of field. So most of your lenses are likely to be at that end, even if they're kit lenses. And you can picture on the end here of a camera on the grass. And there's a reasonable amount in focus prior to it, and behind it you can see, albeit not technically sharp, tack sharp or anything, which is the building, you can see some detail of it. And that progressively changes until we go all the way to the right-hand side, and we can see a nice sort of image with the background blurry and the foreground blurry and so on. All that's changed here is the aperture's been kept the same, but we've zoomed in. So we've gone from 70 millimeters to 135 millimeters to 200 millimeters. And that, as you can see, is having a very similar effect on depth of field as this. And so what another key aspect of the depth of field, what creates the amount of depth of field you have in your image, is the distance between you and the subject, which you can vary physically. So, I mean, this is a coffee cup. If you've got a fixed lens, you can literally further or closer. But if you've got a zoom lens, you can zoom in and out. And that has the same effect. That's going to, technically, as far as the camera is concerned anyway, get you closer to the image or further from the image. And that will affect depth of field. And it's quite a useful little trick. Now, another thing you can do as well is understand what your depth of field is. Now, I've got a little app that I use on my phone called Depth of Field Calc. Let me get it up. And I don't use it when I'm out doing photography a lot, but it kind of looks like that. I'm getting loads of pings coming in from Instagram, as you can see there. Look. But what this does is that you tell it what camera you've got, because the other thing that affects depth of field is your sensor size, so whether you've got a crop sensor or a full frame sensor. So you tell it what camera you've got, then you've got to put 3 things in. The distance you are from the subject, so it's just I've done that wrong. 72 inches. So if I'm 6 feet from the subject, put 6 feet in, my f-stop is 2.8, and I'm zoomed at 200 mil, my depth of field is 0.55 of an inch. So what that means is that tiny little amount like that. And so it's worth maybe getting one of these apps, and there's loads of free ones on the Google Store, Android Store, whatever it is, and on the App Store. Just have a little play, because you will be surprised just how shallow your depth of field can be at quite a close distance. And sometimes that could be why your images are not necessarily as tack sharp as you like. And it's quite common. I often get people say to me, "Oh, my image is never sharp," or they always seem a bit out of focus. It's me and my settings, or I'm just rubbish photographer, or I've got my kits wrong. It might just be that you've got a really shallow depth of field. And as a result of that, it will make you've got, that much of an image in focus. So you took a picture of me and you focused on my nose, my eyes and forehead would be out of focus. So that's one thing to think about. Now, let's move on to getting sharp images. People often ask me about that as well. And I'm just talking through some of the things that people ask me about. So if you've got any questions, do pop it in the comments. We're always happy to talk about it. So getting sharp images is another popular thing. And, birds in flight, this kind of stuff, this kind of stuff, this kind of stuff. And there are lots of things to consider, but one of the most important things is your settings. So first of all, you're going to need a fairly fast shutter speed. If you're going to be getting shot, and when I'm talking about sharp images at the moment, most people ask me that in the context of fast moving images, birds, dogs, whatever it might be, sports, bikes, cars. And so you're going to need a fast shutter speed. So for me, typically when I'm taking shots like this, or like this, I'll probably be shooting at 1200th of a second, 1600th of a second, maybe even 2000th of a second. Because you need to be able to freeze the subject, because the subject is moving across your sensor quickly. If you have a slow shutter speed, where the image is exposed on the sensor for a longer period of time, like a 20th of a second, it will pick up movement, and that's what's called, that will give you soft images. You don't want that. So that's point number one, a fast shutter speed. Point number two is give yourself a bit of depth of field. So we've just talked about depth of field. So if you're trying to shoot something like this Gannet here with f2.8 and you're fairly close, and we were fairly close because I was lying on the edge of a cliff here doing this one, a little bit mad, I know. That can be quite challenging. So maybe shoot at 5.6, because the background behind that Gannet is the sea. It's bloody miles away. So it doesn't, f5.6, f8 even, that gives you maybe at that sort of distance, instead of it being, an inch of depth field, you might have 3 or 4 inches of depth field, which will allow you to have some space so that when your focus point grabs wherever it needs to grab on the image, you're going to have an area that is sharp. So it makes it life a bit easier. Now, this is all to do with focusing now. So we'll talk about this now, shall we? So focusing, there are some cameras with other little ways, 2 ways that your camera will focus. One is continuously and one is one shot, broadly. There are a couple of other variations on that, but those are the most common ones. And so one shot is kind of how I suggest it would be, or that its name suggests. You press the button, half press the shutter, it will focus on something and stop and stay focused until you take a picture. Well, it doesn't stay focused as in it will track it, it will stay where it has focused. So if you focus on me and then I move, it's going to be out of focus. The other method is continuous focus. So on a Canon, that'd be AFC, I think they call it, continuous focus. Some cameras call it continuous focus. Hey, thank God for that. It makes a lot more sense. Canon call it AI servo. I mean, like, unless you don't know, do you? I mean, that's mad. But anyway, AI servo is continuous focus. And so I use that all the time. And people say, yeah, but what about a still subject? And so the way continuous focus works is when you've got your shutter half press, and we'll talk about back button focus in a minute, the camera will continue to regain focus wherever you're pointing it. It's continuous focus. So if I've got a dog running at me, or a bird flying, something like this or whatever, the lens will continually sort of track focus. So I use that all the time. And people say to me, yeah, but when you've got single shot on that, you use that for still subjects, don't you? I'm like, no. Because guess what? In continuous focus, it will continually track a subject that's not moving. I mean, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, really? But it stays focused on it because it's not moving. The minute it moves, or you move, and that's the other thing to think about, you might have a subject that's relatively still, but you might be moving a little bit. And so if you're moving a bit, it will know that and continually focus. So I always use continuous focus is the upshot of that. Now, cameras these days have I don't know if I've got any pictures, actually. I'm not sure. Let me just see if I've got any pictures of different focus points. Oh, I haven't. Yeah, cameras these days have the ability to choose from probably, in some cases, hundreds of focus points around the sensor. I personally like single point focus. Maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned, but it works for me. And it's in the middle, and I can move it around my thumb on the back of the camera. And so wherever that single point is pointing, whatever is behind it when I'm looking through my viewfinder, will be in focus, because that's what it's going to focus on. And that means then that I'm going to make sure that I get, this sort of stuff. Where the image is focusing is where I'm asking it to focus. Now, here we go. I've got some AF areas here. Oh, these are the different sorts you can get. So this is on there's a little GIF actually. Look. So these are the different types you can get. 1 point, expanded area, 9 points, a small group, I call a zone, large vertical, or basically the whole lot. And you can choose that in your camera. Now, we've got hello, we've got a comment. Let's have a look. It kind of depends. It's a good question. And it's a big part of what we do in the Academy. We help everybody with, equipment choices and camera choices. Personally, for me, I'm a dog photographer, so I spend most of my time when I'm not out doing wildlife photography and on the various retreats that we do, as you'll see there on the website and on the Facebook groups. I like my 70 to 200 because it gives me a really nice range. And that's a good all-round lens, very popular lens, that particular range of lens. If you wanted to do landscapes and that kind of stuff, then you might want a wider lens to get more of the image in. So have I got any landscape pictures? I probably have. Let's have a look. Where are my landscape pictures? Here we go. That sort of stuff. That was taken with a 16 to 35 mil, so a wider angle lens. If you want to do sort of lots of wildlife stuff, now this was shot with, I think, a 300 mil lens. So in answer to your question, Ellie, it kind of depends on what you're going to shoot and what you're going to be shooting a lot. If you want to do macro photography, get a macro lens. And a macro lens, so let's imagine this is the Canon 100mm one. It's not, it's a coffee cup. But the 100mm macro lens, the reason it's called a macro lens is it allows a shorter minimum focus distance. Most lenses, like my 70-200, focuses down to about 3 feet. I think it is a meter. So, that sort of distance. Roughly a bit more. A macro lens, you can get like proper up close. You can do stuff like, just let me bear with me, like that. Now, the thing to keep in mind with a macro lens, of course, they are usually sort of typically 85 mil, 105, 100 mil. They are still that lens. So you can use them. So they make it the 100 mil macro lens that Canon do. I think you also do an 85 one. Nikon do an 85 as well. Makes a really good portrait lens. So it's a double bubble, if that makes sense. So good question. Thank you, Ellie. Now, where was I going? Yes, so individual focusing, going back to the pictures again of this sort of stuff, I like to use single point focus. Now, they are getting better, especially if you've got a mirrorless camera. Then something like, let's have a little look. Let me think of another example I could show you of. I haven't got many examples on. Here we go. Oh, I know. This one here. So I use single point focus, so I was able to point it at the head of this bird, and I got a nice shot. Lovely. If I'd used the focus setting where the camera picks from a whole range of focus points dotted around the sensor, what's to stop it picking the tip of the wing near me? Often do that, or maybe some of this yellow in the background. So that's the reason I don't do it. Now, mirrorless cameras, and I'll come on and talk about in a second, mirrorless and DSLR, because that's another question we get asked a lot, are getting better, and as are DSLRs. So some of them now have the ability to understand what it is that they're trying to focus on. So you've got animal tracking, face tracking, cars, bikes, and stuff like that. So they're getting more advanced. So it gives you the ability to give the camera a little bit more control. What's another one? Let's have a look. DSLR versus, I think I've got a picture on here. I can show you the difference. Let me see if I can find it. So I'm going to talk about DSLR versus mirrorless now. Here it is. Right. Something that people ask me a lot. Digital SLR, which is, they've been around for years. And prior to that, it was film SLR. So they were just called SLRs. Is still a huge part of the market. Mirrorless cameras are more of a recent addition. Looks like my tea. But have started to gain massive popularity. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One of them is size. They tend to be a little bit smaller and more compact. and the other one is sometimes the focusing ability can be significantly better. Now, let me tell you the difference, the physical difference. So let's pop this up. So on the left-hand side here, we've got a little schematic of a DSLR, and on the right, we've got the same of a mirrorless, and you can see the difference already in terms of size. So the DSLR on the front, on the left, sorry, the light comes in through the lens. If you ever change your lens on DSLR, you see that little mirror looking at you. The image that is being created and focused via the lens is then reflected up into that lump on top of your camera, which is the pentaprism, sometimes called a pentamirror. There's a piece of glass in there that's got polished edges to it, and it refracts the lens, it refracts that image, so that when you're looking through the viewfinder, what you're seeing is what's like, almost like, in some ways, it's like an upside down periscope. But what you are physically seeing is the image through that lens. There's a separate little AF sensor, as you can see, and there's a pink dot at the bottom. So that image is also being reflected down. It doesn't show you here, but it is reflected down onto the sensor to help it focus. Then behind that is the shutter, the green thing, which when it opens, exposes the image sensor, which is in the old days where your film would have been. And you take a picture. So that's kind of broadly a DSLR. Now, on the right-hand side here, you can see a mirrorless camera. It is significantly less complex, hence the less size, because it doesn't have the pentamirror at the top. It has a shutter unit and a sensor. Focusing is done on the sensor, which is sometimes why it's faster and quite often more accurate, because it's actually on the sensor. It is smaller because it doesn't have that pentaprism mirror lump on the top, and can be taking a lot faster in terms of images, 20, 30, 40 frames a second, stuff like that. So that's the basic difference between the two. Now, is one better than the other? I don't know. I shoot the DSLR. I've got a business, very successful business. It doesn't hold me back, my DSLR, but it's certainly going that way. Now, I'm a Canon shooter, as some of you know. So I've got a 1DX Mark II, which I've had for some years now. I'm probably going to opt for the R3 that's out at the moment, or I'm going to hang around up probably and wait and see what the R1, which is in development, and to see what that's like, because goodness knows what that's going to be about. So I want to wait for that. But for the Nikon users out there, there's a Z series, a Z9, rare as hen's teeth though. In fairness, the R3 is the same. So they're two sort of mirrorless cameras. There's the R5 and the R6, the recent Canon ones. The last few years they came out. They're great bits of kit. But one of the other differences, I suppose, what are the disadvantages? Not that anybody's asked me that, but I'm going to answer the question that nobody's asked. And there aren't really any major disadvantages, but the one issue that you could have, if you look at this, if you think about it, it's like, okay, well, I'm looking through here on the DSLR through a mirror. It doesn't take any battery power to do that. Whereas the way you see the image in your viewfinder or on the back of your screen, but certainly in the viewfinder on mirrorless, is via what's called an EVF, electronic viewfinder. Little screen inside that viewfinder, little TV if you like, and that is creating a digital version of what the sensor's seeing, and that takes battery power. So typically the battery power on these mirrorless cameras is less, but they've already started to improve it. The batteries are bigger and chunkier, they last a bit longer, and you just get a spare battery, don't you? It's not the end of the world, but that's about it really. So there was no real drawbacks to them. If you'd asked me that 2 years ago, I'd have said, yeah, they haven't got the range of lenses to go with them. You can use your existing lenses, so you can get adapters to use the existing. If this was a real lens, this would be called an EF lens, but the mirrorless lenses are RF mount, so you can buy a little piece of kit that goes in between the two, and that will then work. And they work really well actually. But now, certainly for Canon and Nikon, their range of mirrorless compatible lenses is significant, right up to Canon's recent launch of a 1200mm one. Yeah, you can buy an RF 1200mm lens. I mean, it's just nuts. What else can I tell you about? Let's have a little look. Image stabilization. That comes up because a lot of lenses have got that now, and a lot of cameras have. And in cameras have got it. It's called IBIS, in body stabilization. It's like, so people naturally think, time for the slurper tea. Now I've got a button that says image stabilization. I'm going to switch it on, leave it on, and not necessarily the best plan. So let me show you how it works for a minute. Got a picture here, look. So lens stabilization on the left. It's not overly sharp, this, I know, so apologies for that. What goes on is that mirror, as you can see on the left there with a little up and down arrow, or that not mirror, that piece of glass will move around to stop the little jaggedy movements that are coming in as a result of moving the lens. Sensor stabilization is exactly the same thing, except the sensor moves. So what's going on is you've got your lens and it's moving around like this to keep it steady on the sensor, the pieces of glass inside this lens, there's a couple of them, will sort of move up and down to try and keep things still. And sometimes when you switch it on, you can hear it like tiny little motors. These tiny little gyroscopes that keep it floating. It's very effective. But it's really about stabilizing your lens and or your camera, or either or. It doesn't stabilize the image, even though it's called image stabilization, if that makes sense, or the subject, should I say. So what it's designed to do is, I'm taking a picture on really low shutter speed, that sort of very slight movement I might have on my lens is going to be compensated by having stabilization switched on. If you have it switched on and you're doing action photography and you're panning around like this, and you know, tracking a subject moving fast, these little bits of the sensor could be trying to keep up with it. The optics that are part of the image stabilization system in your camera, in your lens, sorry, will have a right old challenge trying to keep up. And if anything, it can make the images seem a little bit softer. So I only really use it for low light and relatively static subjects. That makes sense. Right, what else? So we've talked about a few sort of technical things there. Let's have a little look. What's another thing I could tell you about? Oh, okay, yeah, I know. This one here. Getting off the auto setting. Everybody asks me about that. Who joins? Who's already on it? If you're on it, they want to get off it. Part of the reason people join is to sort of understand it. Now, in auto, your camera is in charge. Time for a slurp. So it decides what to do in terms of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And for some images that are kind of like the point and shoot scenarios, that's probably going to be fine. But when you want to start having action shots or landscape shots with big depth of field or anything like that, then you need to not be allowing your camera to make the decision about what goes, as it were. And so in order to understand that, you have to understand this, the exposure triangle. So at the bottom there, if you can't see it, that is aperture. And on the bottom right, it says shutter speed, and the top it says ISO. Now, what this is a graphical way, and it's quite common, it's a graphical way of explaining the three aspects that you need to consider. So when your camera's in auto, it's playing with those levers itself. It does what it wants. But in manual, so let's go to the extreme manual, you have to pick those three settings. So you have to set the ISO, which is at the top, the shutter speed, which is at the right, and the aperture. Now, you'll use a little meter in the viewfinder, which will tell you whether it's exposed or not, or just take a picture and see if it's exposed or not, and then make some changes. But why do we, what settings should I use for different scenarios? And it kind of depends on what's important to you in terms of the image you are trying to create. Let me just switch that band off a minute. Just driving me nuts. That's better. It depends on what you're trying to say. If I'm going to be shooting dogs, for me, or wildlife that's moving around fast, like birds or something, on the right-hand side here, bottom right, I'm going to be interested in shutter speed. So shutter speed, I'm going to say, well, I want that at 1200. So that part of this equation, because think about this as an equation, is fixed. I want it at 1200 a second. So, but then I want my aperture at 2.8 because I want a shallow depth field. So that's 2 points of this equation that mathematically had to add up in terms of the way the sensor works. So the only other one I can vary is the ISO. So I might, if it's low light, need to have a relatively high ISO. But that trade-off is noise. So if I have a high ISO, there's a chance I have noise. So it's like, okay, in which case then I might try and shoot in better light, or I might drop my shutter speed. If I want to shoot a landscape shot and I want a lot of depth of field, which you see on the bottom corner there, then I might have an aperture of f32 or f22, which is, if you remember, go back to the pictures, a small hole, which means I need to have a much slower shutter speed. But frankly, if you're going to be shooting landscapes, you're probably using a tripod so you can get away with it. So what you can start to see here is understanding that relationship is important. Now, there are two other semi-auto modes, shutter priority and aperture priority. And so in shutter priority, I pick the shutter speed on my camera. It will pick the shutter, and I also put the ISO, unless you want to leave that in auto, although I don't recommend that. Here's what noise looks like if you're reasonably new to photography. It's the graininess you see in an image. So you can see that on the right, very noisy, shot at ISO 3200, shot at 100, clean image. Now, cameras are getting better and better at handling noise. So, some less expensive cameras are more noisy than some more expensive cameras, but it is getting better. So what you need to find out is go out on a sort of a dull, grainy day, and we have plenty of them, don't we, in the UK, and take some photos at 100 ISO if there's enough light, and then at 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and then have a look at the images and get to a point where you understand with your camera how harsh you can push your ISO beyond which you don't really want to use it. A bit like working out where the red line is on your car. Right. Any questions? Let me just check. No. Right. What else can I tell you about? Let me talk about this. I mean, like, really? Yep. You get your camera, first time you get it, you take it out of the box, you got all these things to worry about. The good news is, and it's part of what we do in the academy, you don't need to worry about all of that. It's a bit like when you first get your car. And it's an analogy I often use, and people often find it quite amusing. When you first learn to drive, when you first get in your car, a new car or a car you've not used before, you get your seat adjusted, you get that all right, you'll get your backrest right, you get your headrest right, you'll adjust the steering wheel if it goes up and down, you do your wing mirrors and your review mirror. That's it. That's a bit like all those settings. Most of them are things you do once to get it all set up, your file size, JPEG, RAW, and all that kind of stuff. I'll come on to JPEG and RAW in a minute. And then it's really talking about that exposure triangle. Then you're really driving. So it's steering wheel, accelerator, brake, clutch sort of thing. And it becomes a lot simpler. So don't be put off by a DSLR or a mirrorless camera if you're using a sort of point and shoot compact camera. It is not as complicated as you think. It really isn't. Now, what else? So I was going to talk about then. Oh, yes, RAW versus JPEG. I was talking about this the other day to some people on one of our webinars. So, should I shoot in RAW? Should I shoot in JPEG? What is the difference? I shoot in RAW because it gives me all of the data from the image that's created in the camera so that I can do a much more detailed edit later, in simple terms. But what is the difference? So a RAW image is literally, you take the photo, the camera captures all that data, absolutely everything, and saves it, all of it. Doesn't do anything with it either, it just saves it. So it'd be a bigger file. My camera puts out 25 meg files, roughly. Some of these mirrorless ones put 30, 40 meg files out, big files. If I switch my camera onto JPEG, it will be a smaller file. Typically, it might be 5 or 6 megs, so I get more on the card. That used to be one of the major benefits years ago, but memory cards now are less expensive. I mean, some of the ones for mirrorless CFast cards are still quite expensive, but on CF Express. But generally speaking, memory is more available, so that's not really a major issue now. But what you will find with a JPEG is that what it does is it throws away data because it compresses the file in order to get it that size. So what does it do? Here's an unedited image. Now this is a RAW image, and I'll show you in a second the one I edited. But what we've got going on here is an image that is, if this was a JPEG, it would have taken this image and then gone, right, before it saves it to the file, it's gone, right, okay, we've got quite a lot of green color in the background, so we can bung a load of the pixels in the bin that are similar. And then across this dog's face and his ears, there's a lot of black there, so we can chuck away a lot of that data. And in doing so, it creates a smaller file. The other thing it will do as well is it will do a little bit of a basic edit. So in your camera, you've got things called picture style, and you can have it as faithful, monochrome, lots of different settings. And whatever you've chosen, it will apply those settings to your JPEG image. But in doing so, it's made the image a lot smaller. And when it comes to an image like this, had this been a JPEG, I wouldn't have been able to edit the dark shadows of the dog's face. Because it's a RAW, I'm able to do that with it. Look at all the detail in there. Look at this. It looks gorgeous. But from an image that you might have gone a bit dark, throw it away. So that's kind of RAW JPEG. Definitely something to consider. Exposure compensation. Let me talk about that. This is the button. That's where you typically find it on a Canon, Nikon, on a Fuji. It doesn't work in manual because in manual you are in charge of exposure completely. But in pretty much all the other modes, you can adjust the exposure and compensate it slightly. And I always like to overexpose. In wildlife world, it's considered to be called ETTR, which is an acronym for exposed to the right. And exposure compensating, if you're going to go +1, say, which is often where I am, +1 and a bit maybe, or 1 or 3/4, what you're saying to the camera is expose as it is and just make it a little bit brighter. And the reason I do that is so that I get all the data I want. There you go. Yeah, love it. I've got an image I'll talk to you about there. Here we go. Where is it? Here it is. So by overexposing, I'm able to get all the detail in this bird's fur underneath. And it makes a huge difference. The other benefit of having that, and obviously when you come to edit it, you'll turn it down very slightly because you'll drop it down. But the noise, remember noise, our arch enemy noise here, look on the right. whatever level of noise you've got in your image, and there's always some, if you then have to increase the exposure slider in Lightroom, say, which is, you know, a big part of what we do in the academy, or play with a shadow slider, that will add more noise. Whereas if your image is too bright, you know, not overly exposed where it's like blown out, but just a little bit bright, if you're turning down exposure or dropping the highlights or dropping the lights, that's not going to add any noise. And noise on an image will affect its sharpness. We don't want that. No. Right. Okay. I'm conscious of time. There we go. There's another little way of looking at depth of field, look, or that exposure triangle. So aperture, shutter speed, ISO on the left, and as you can see, you'll start to see if the little pictogram at the top. There's a little chap in front of mountains, all in focus at f32, and on the right, not much in focus. You can look at shutter speed, little man running nice and sharp at 1/1000 and very blurry at you know, 1/115th of a second, and then noise. Just another little way of looking at it. There are lots of different ways of approaching it. And for some people, different ways of understanding things, like bulb moments, I call them, will come in different shapes and sizes. So back to the academy a minute. Now, you can currently join for the academy. It's normally £39 a month, which, you know, gets you all of the stuff I've just talked about in terms of the features that are in there and more. Or you can join it annually, and that's 400 and something. I can't remember now, 400 something pounds. And that was, we were running that half price, and we had an offer on at the £39, reducing it to 29. Right now, for 24 hours, which ends later tonight, well, probably be tomorrow now, we've put together, because stuff's expensive at the moment, isn't it? Stuff's very expensive. So we've got two options for you to join. You can use a code at checkout. So if you're on the website and you click join, put in the coupon code, type in half price on the membership one, the monthly one, and it'll give it half price, which makes it less than 20 quid, £19, something or other. And then if you want to join on an annual basis, there's another 60 quid off of what was already 50% off. And that's ridiculous. That works out about 15 quid a month. So let me give you the links to those, because if you can't remember those codes, let me give you the link. So here's the first one coming up. This is the annual one. Make sure I get this right, because I sometimes get this wrong. Right, so this link here, let me go back to comments. It's a shortcut link. Paste. Yeah. So what was reduced by 50% originally on there right now is now, if you use that link, got another 60 quid off. So it makes it 180 quid or something for the year. And you get access to everything, which is brilliant. And then the other one, which I'll give you now, is the monthly one, which is half price. Copy. Half price monthly. Post that there. That's half price monthly. So let me just share the screen a minute, because what I'm going to do, let me just, I'm just going to do something here. All right, I'm going to show you what that link looks like. Right, here we go. Copy. Right, bear with me, and I'll share this now. Paste and go. Right, it's working. We love it when stuff comes together. So share screen. Well, I'm just going to show you what when you click on that link. This is what it takes you directly to the checkout bit. Hide that. God, I got a lot of stuff on here. Come on. There it is. So that, having used that link, full member is normally $4.99. We were running it at half price for you, $249. But by clicking that link, it now takes off that $249 another 60 quid, so it makes 189 quid. You stick your email address in, your name, credit card, password, and you have then got access to all this stuff. While we're here on the Academy, this is what the website looks like. This bit at the top here, if you're interested in going pro, by the way, register interest here. Can't do it. You can't join at the moment, but that's to do with the full frame club. But you scroll down, look, here it is, Academy membership. It's all the features. It says save up to 50%. But look, this is a little, what we call a landing page, which takes you to all the stuff about it, everything you get, and the two options that were there. And if you click to join those direct through there, you will need to put in the code. So if I put in half price, buy, yeah, works. So there's another way of doing it, if that makes sense. Anyway, stop screen. Hope that makes sense. So it's a bit of a mad offer, but we were talking about it the other day, and the world's expensive. I put some fuel in my car the other day, nearly had a heart attack. But it doesn't mean that people are not enjoying photography. So if you want to learn more, have a reason to use your camera, or maybe get to a point where you can earn a living from it, because that's a whole full frame club separate thing. But we've got a lot of people who've gone through and done that and are earning income from it. But if you just want to spend more time with your camera and learn more about it and take those photos you've always wanted to do, join the academy. You can do it now. And those are the links that will get you half price, so it becomes 19 quid a month, or you do it annually at 189 quid. Right? Do you know what? I haven't worked out what it is. Let's do it live on air, shall we? 189.95. 189.95 divided by 12, £15.80 something. I mean, it's a bargain. So that's the one I would do, isn't it? But then I would say that. So unless there's any more comments, which I don't think there are, or questions. If you have any questions, by the way, drop me a message. You'll be able to message if you're on the Academy Facebook page or the Carl Thomas Photography one. There's the message thing here. You can do that. Always happy to help and answer any questions or anything like that. But if not, it'd be great to see you. These links are live. I put them live yesterday. I said 24 hours. It's now 30, so we'll close them tomorrow. Leave them open for 24 hours from today, and then they'll go back to the previously discounted prices. It'll still be a good deal, but it won't be quite like this. So now it's a bit of an opportunity. I think they call it a flash sale in marketing terms, don't they? So I'm going to leave you in peace. Hope that's been useful. Have a great day, and thanks for listening. See you later. Bye.